apple in Dad's eye because he's being groomed to become king of Egypt. So this was a blow. There's other blows to Ramses. For example, remember the sun Wasit? Now the name there means something like rising in Thebes or shining in Thebes. Remember, Thebes was called Wasit. That was the ancient name for it, meaning the scepter, power. And Wasit was that overachiever son that we talked about last time. He is the first archaeologist in history. He puts labels on pyramids because he's afraid that the builders of the pyramid, now, pyramids are of course 1,000 years old now, and he is afraid that the builders of the pyramids will be forgotten, that we won't know who built this pyramid, who built that, because remember, most of the pyramids are uninscribed until we get to the 5th dynasty. So he goes around putting labels, museum labels, on pyramids. So he's really an archaeologist, but he's also the high priest of Memphis. And a very important title. Memphis is the capital of Egypt now, right? The administrative capital is in the north, Memphis. Thebes is in the south. And Wasit does other things, remember. He also is the one who starts building the Serapeum, this maze of tombs for the Apis bull. But we'll talk about that in detail later. But Wasit is really, a doer. He dies. So we're getting an awful lot of deaths in Ramses' family, which is quite normal. When you have 100 kids, God knows how many wives, you're going to experience these things. And some of them are going to be very close to you, and you're going to feel it. So I tend to get the feeling of Ramses as a man who's taken his knocks. It's not the famous Mel Brooks line, it's great to be king. Sometimes it's not so great to be king. Now, Ramses turns his attention, I think, away from building temples. I mean, he's a great builder. It's in his blood. But I think he turns it towards building tombs. This is where Ramses' sort of mindset is in the next world, towards death. And the first thing I'd like to talk about with Ramses as a tomb builder is Nefertari's tomb, his beloved wife who dies around year 20. She's buried in the Valley of the Queens. The ancient name for the Valley of the Queens was the Place of Beauty. And Nefertari's tomb, I think everybody agrees, is perhaps the most beautiful tomb in all of Egypt. It's interesting trying to figure out why. It's not clear. I think it's partly that the background is painted a very clear white. Most tombs don't have this white background, but it's certainly beautiful. And it was restored. There are problems with the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens. The problem is salt. Salt crystals. The water table has changed in Egypt since the Aswan Dam. Water is rising, goes up into the stone, and what happens is salt in the stone migrates to the surface in the form of crystals, and it breaks through the plaster, the painting, and the plaster starts to flake off. Well, we're fortunate with the tomb of Nefertari, which was in terrible shape. The most beautiful tomb in Egypt was closed for many, many years. Many years. And then the Getty Institute, John Paul Getty's famous museum, also has.
What's up, everybody? Back with another discussion on ancient Egypt. So, throughout social history, most of us have grown up watching the Ten Commandments and all these other biblical movies. And they always show Ramses the Great as this evil monarch enslaving the Jews. Well, we're going to take an archaeological look at ancient Egypt. And we're going to find out just how evil, if at all, Ramses the Great was. And we learn now that he's lost wives, he's lost kids. He's on the losing end of his reign as pharaoh. So, sometimes a lot of deaths can make you a bitter person. But they say he didn't start out that way. So this is ancient Egypt. The narrator is Professor Bob Brown. Let's get into it.
A conservation division, and they do things around the world, gratis, for free, just because it's a good thing to do. And, thank God they've got more money than anybody. And they went, and for years, they had a team of Italians mainly working on the tomb of Nefertari. They basically took the plaster off the wall and piece by piece picked out the salt crystals that had migrated to the surface. Then put a seal and then put the plaster back. I mean, a remarkable job. And then the question was the big debate. Should we paint in the places that are missing? And they did a kind of interesting experiment. They had a section of the tomb where they put in the painting that was missing. They could have done it so you'd never know. They could have done it just like the Egyptian and you'd never be able to see it. But they decided not to. So whenever they put in a restoration, they put a little cross-hatching, very fine. It's just so you can tell this is new. And eventually they decided not to do it with the whole tomb. They decided to just restore it as best they can. And it's now open to the public. It's not easy to get into in this sense. First of all, it's an expensive tomb. Most tombs in Egypt are very inexpensive. This one, I believe, is now 100 Egyptian pounds, which is about $30 to get into. So that's a lot of money in Egypt, and it's the most expensive of all tombs, but it's worth it. And they're trying to keep down the volume of people in it. When I last saw it, they were only selling about 100 tickets per day. Because any time a tourist goes into a tomb, you are perspiring, and you are giving off water into the atmosphere. You are changing the humidity of the tomb. And that is, in a sense, leading to its destruction. So they have to control the number of people in this tomb. The Getty even suggested after they fixed it, after they restored it, that it be closed permanently. Interesting, just restoring it to have it for the heritage, but not for people to see. And I think eventually it may be closed. But it's a beautiful tomb, and Ramsey's built this for his beloved Nefertari. Now, that, of course, isn't the only one he's got to worry about. He's got 52 sons. What about Amenhotep? What about Chaim Wasset? Chaim Wasset may have been buried in the north. We think he may have been buried in the Serapeum. We're not sure. But what about all these other sons? And this is where the famous KV5 comes in. The tomb in the Valley of the Kings that has been called KV5. You know, as I mentioned once before, every tomb is numbered. And Kings Valley 5 is the tomb that Ramses built for his sons. It was discovered really in the early part of the 19th century. Then it was lost. It was covered over. How does it get covered over? How does a tomb get covered over? There are occasional rainstorms in the Valley of the Kings. Infrequent. But when they come, boulders practically come rushing down through the valley and rush into open tombs. So this tomb became blocked up, obliterated, and lost. It was rediscovered in 1987 by Dr. Kent Weeks, who was with the American University in Cairo. Weeks is in charge of a very important project, the Theban Mapping Project. Believe it or not, there is no modern map of the Valley of the Kings. No modern map which accurately pinpoints and diagrams all the tombs. Kent Weeks has been doing this for 20 years, trying to do the most accurate map possible. It's an important project. And as part of his project, he knew that there was supposed to be this tomb, but he had to go find it. So he rediscovered it in 1987, and they all got quite a shock when they went into it. They had to crawl in. The debris was so high that they had to crawl in on their bellies. They only had probably about 3 feet between the ceiling and the top of the debris, and they're crawling in. 2 of them, actually. The first was Kent Weeks and another Egyptologist, Catherine Rehrig. They crawled in, and they could see that there was a pillared hallway, and eventually they started clearing the tomb because they had to diagram it, and that's when they got their shock. It's the largest tomb in all of Egypt. It has hundreds of rooms. Hundreds. And it's on several levels. I've been in the tomb only once. It's a little bit dangerous. It's not structurally sound. And I've been in it once, and you feel disoriented. It's not like any other tomb I've ever been in. Because you got all these rooms, and then you go down another level, and you go back under, and there's more tombs. And the question is, what are all these rooms used for? One possibility is these are chapels where offerings could be made to the sons of Ramses, and then perhaps beneath will be the tombs of the sons. They have found objects that indicate this was used for a burial. Pieces of coffins, pieces of the canopic jars, the jars that held the internal organs. This will be a very difficult excavation. Weeks has been working on it now for years. And you have to take out the debris, and it's like cement. And also, you can't just remove it all at once. You're going to change the humidity and the climate in the tomb, and walls are going to start moving. So this is an excavation that I think will probably take more than 100 years. They will probably have to clear one room, let the tomb stabilize, bring in the engineers to shore up the ceiling so they don't fall on you, and then maybe wait another 10 years, excavate a little bit. So it's more than a lifetime project, but this is probably it certainly is the largest tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and Ramses built it for his sons. Ramses also had to build his own tomb. Now, with all these tombs being built, Ramses needed an entire city of workmen. And there is a city of the workmen called Deir el-Medina, which is not far from the Valley of the Kings, and we know more about this city than any other ancient city in the world, because they left little notes to each other. We have potsherds with inscriptions on it. So we know how they constructed a tomb. We know that they had a right-hand gang and a left-hand gang for Ramses' tomb. One guys would work on the right-hand wall, others would work on the left-hand wall. And we even know things like, for example, their bronze chisels. They were weighed at the beginning of the week and at the end of the week, so nobody could steal any bronze, because bronze was valuable. So you got your chisels, and they were weighed at the beginning and at the end. Kind of like in the old days when people used to shave the edges of gold coins to get a little bit, when gold coins were in circulation, you'd shave the edge of maybe 1,000 coins, you'd have a little pile of gold. So they were weighed. Now, Ramses had an entire city working on these tombs. And Ramses' tomb, of course, is huge. It's terribly damaged, unfortunately, but it's huge. And my hunch is that the burial chamber of Ramses the Great probably held more treasure than any other room in the ancient world ever held. Think about Tutankhamun. 10 years to stuff it. Ramses had 67 years. So when Ramses died, he is buried in a major tomb. Now, what I'd like to do next time is talk about why did Ramses have this midlife crisis? And the Exodus may have something to do with it. I'll see you then.
So, Ramses is going through hell on earth. People dying all around him. Wives, mistresses, kids. What is a man to do? Who knows? But we're getting ready to find out how he built his tomb and the workforce that he had. Were they really the Jews, the Israelites, or was this a separate group of people? Well, stay tuned. We'll find out.
Hello again. Welcome back. Remember last time we ended with the death of my man Ramses the Great? I'd like to take a little bit of a chronological detour. And we're not going to talk about the next king. I want to talk about the Bible, about Exodus in particular, because many people feel that Ramses is the pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, what I'd like to do is basically tell you the Exodus story. We'll talk about the story of Exodus as it is in the Bible, and then we'll look to see, how do you get evidence for this? Is there any internal evidence? Is there any external evidence? And we'll see, did it really happen? Now, first of all, about Exodus. One of the curious things about the biblical tale of Exodus is that there is practically no archaeological evidence to support it. There are many things in the Bible that we have found archaeological evidence for. Many. But when it comes to Exodus, the record seems blank. There's no record of large numbers of Israelites in Egypt. We don't have a record of any man named Moses. None of that. So it's very difficult to try to figure out, did this thing really happen or not? But what we'll do is, as I say, we'll talk about the story as it's presented, and then we'll see, is there any way we can get some sort of evidence for it, or maybe decide it didn't happen. First, the story. Well, one of the things about Exodus is it's the foundation of the Jewish faith. It is crucial. The Exodus story is mentioned more in the Old Testament than any other event in the Bible. Right? It's mentioned more than any other event. And it really deals with three stages in the history of the Israelites. First, it's the Israelites in bondage. Right? That's sort of part of it. Then it's the Exodus itself when they leave. And then it's the third stage where they wander and finally come to the promised land. Right? Let's start with Israel in bondage. Now remember way back when we talked about the Joseph story?